On the morning of 22 June 1948, a converted troopship called the Empire Windrush eased up the River Thames and docked at Tilbury. On board were several hundred passengers from the Caribbean, many of them ex-servicemen who had fought for Britain during the war. They came looking for work, invited by a country that desperately needed rebuilding. What none of them could have known was that this quiet, misty morning would come to symbolize the beginning of modern London. To understand what they were arriving into, you have to go back further. By the late 19th century, London was the beating heart of the largest empire in human history, governing roughly a quarter of the globe. Its docks, stretching through miles along the Thames, moved goods from every corner of that empire. Tea, spices, timber, sugar. In 1863, the city had already opened the world's first underground railway. That London was not just a capital, it was a machine, built to administer and extract from an empire that spanned continents. But empires end, and machines break down. Killing 430 people and injuring 1,600 on the first night alone. It was the start of what became known as the Blitz. 57 consecutive nights of bombing that turned entire neighborhoods to rubble. By the time the raids finally eased, close to 30,000 Londoners had been killed. And more than 12,000 metric tons of bombs had fallen on the city. The docks that had powered an empire now lay scarred and burning. This is the London the Windrush sailed into in 1948. A bombed, exhausted city, its labor force depleted, its infrastructure damaged, its empire already beginning to unravel as colonies pushed for independence. The passengers who stepped off that ship were not just migrants. They were part of the answer to a question Britain hadn't fully asked yet. For a while, the docks kept running. In 1961, they hit their peak, processing over 60 million tons of cargo in a single year. But change was already coming, and it wasn't dramatic. It was quiet, technical, and unstoppable. Cargo ships were growing larger. A new method called containerization meant fewer dock workers were needed to move more goods. And those bigger ships needed deeper water than London's upriver docks could offer. Trade began shifting downstream, toward Tilbury. By 1981, the West India and Millwall docks, once symbols of British maritime power, had closed for good. Cranes stood rusting. Warehouses stood empty. An entire section of the city that had defined London's economy for over a century had simply stopped working. The government's answer arrived that same year. In 1981, the London Docklands Development Corporation was formed. The Isle of Dogs, once dense with cargo and labor, was declared an enterprise zone, offering tax incentives to any developer willing to take a chance on it. Few believed it would work. Some called the plans for a light railway through the ruins a white elephant, a route to nowhere. Then, just 5 years later, something else happened. This time not on the riverfront but in the heart of the financial district. On 27 October 1986, in a moment the city nicknamed Big Bang, the London Stock Exchange. Then, just 5 years later, something else happened. This time not on the riverfront but in the heart of the financial district. Fixed commissions were scrapped. The old divide between stock jobbers and stockbrokers, a rule that had shaped trading for a century, was abolished. Trading itself moved from the shouting chaos of the exchange floor to electronic screens. For decades, London had been losing financial business to New York and Tokyo. Big Bang was meant to stop that slide, and it did. Almost immediately, trading volumes surged. And international banks that had never had proper access to London's markets began setting up offices in the city. These two stories, one of abandoned docks and one of a deregulated stock exchange, might seem unconnected. But together they explain everything that came next. The financial industry, suddenly larger and hungrier for space, needed somewhere to grow. The derelict Docklands, sitting empty just a few miles east, needed exactly that kind of investment. In 1987, the Docklands Light Railway opened, connecting the old dock ruins to the rest of the city. A year later, construction began on what would become Canary Wharf, built directly on the site of the old West India docks. By 1991, its centerpiece, One Canada Square, was complete, a stone and glass tower that became the tallest building in Britain. And remained so for over 20 years. What had been a graveyard of empty warehouses just a decade earlier was now London's second financial district, filled daily with tens of thousands of workers. The transformation wasn't just architectural. It was a complete rewriting of what London's economy was for. The city that had once built its wealth on ships and colonial trade now built it on capital, on numbers moving across screens at the speed of light. The skyline kept climbing. In March 2012, construction finished on the Shard. It's a 309.6-meter glass tower on the south bank of the Thames, designed by the architect Renzo Piano to resemble. It became, and remains, the tallest building in the United Kingdom. Where St. Paul's Dome once dominated London's skyline through the smoke of the Blitz, glass towers now define it. Monuments not to empire, but to finance, migration, and reinvention. And the people who now fill that skyline reflect a city almost unrecognizable from the one the Windrush sailed into. Today, London's population stands at roughly 9.8 million people, more than 40% of them born outside the United Kingdom. Over 300 languages are spoken across the city. The empire that once ruled a quarter of the world from London's offices is long gone. But in its place, London absorbed the world instead. One ship, one migration, one deregulated market, one glass tower at a time. Walk the Isle of Dogs today, and you'll find glass towers standing on the exact ground where cargo ships once unloaded goods from across an empire. The empire is gone. The docks are gone. But the city that empire built kept building itself anyway, one reinvention after another. And it isn't finished yet.